Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport truck, her boots hitting the dusty ground of the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, California. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as she adjusted her gear bag on her shoulder. Around her, dozens of other candidates were doing the same, but there was one obvious difference. She was the only woman among the sea of muscular men. The whispers started immediately. Sarah could hear them without even trying to listen. "What's she doing here?" one voice muttered. "This isn't a place for girls," another added with a chuckle. She kept her face neutral, her jaw set in determination. This wasn't the first time she'd heard such comments, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Sarah had spent the last 8 years in the Army, working her way up from a private to a staff sergeant. She'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, earned her Ranger tab, and completed every challenging course the military had thrown at her. When the opportunity came to cross-train with the Navy SEALs as part of a special inter-service program, she jumped at it without hesitation. The training facility sprawled across acres of California coastline, with obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and classroom buildings scattered throughout. Sarah could smell the salt air mixed with gun oil and sweat. This place had a reputation for breaking even the toughest soldiers, and she knew the next few weeks would test every limit she had. "Listen up," boomed a voice that made everyone snap to attention. Chief Petty Officer Mike Thompson emerged from a nearby building, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the afternoon sun. His arms were covered in tattoos that told stories of deployments around the world, and his eyes held the cold intensity of someone who had seen combat up close. Thompson's gaze swept across the group of candidates before settling on Sarah. His expression didn't change, but she could see the slight narrowing of his eyes. He'd clearly noticed the anomaly in his class roster. "Welcome to hell, people," Thompson continued, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "For the next 4 weeks, you'll be learning advanced close-quarters combat, weapons handling, and tactical operations. Half of you won't make it through the first week. The other half will wish they hadn't." The chief began pacing in front of the assembled candidates, his boots crunching on the gravel. "I don't care what unit you came from or what pretty ribbons you've got on your chest. Here you start from zero. You prove yourself every single day, or you get shipped back to whatever desk job you crawled out from." Sarah noticed how several of the male candidates kept glancing in her direction. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few seemed openly hostile. She'd dealt with this kind of attention throughout her military career, but the intensity here felt different. These weren't regular soldiers. They were elite operators who had earned their place through years of grueling training and combat experience. "Your first lesson starts now," Thompson announced, gesturing toward a large building behind him. "Combat training facility. Move." The candidates grabbed their gear and jogged toward the building. Sarah fell in line with the others, maintaining the same pace, despite the extra weight of proving herself that seemed to press down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. Inside the facility, the walls were lined with every type of weapon imaginable: rifles, pistols, knives, and various pieces of tactical equipment. Thick mats covered most of the floor space, and the air smelled like leather and cleaning solvent. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the room, giving everything an almost clinical appearance. "Drop your gear and form up in 3 lines," Thompson commanded. The candidates quickly complied, with Sarah finding herself in the middle row, surrounded by men who towered over her 5'6" frame. Thompson walked to the center of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Hand-to-hand combat is the foundation of everything we do here. When your weapon jams, when you're out of ammunition, when everything goes wrong, your body becomes your weapon." He gestured to a younger instructor who had been standing quietly in the corner. "This is Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez. He'll be demonstrating proper takedown techniques. I need a volunteer." Several hands shot up immediately, but Thompson's eyes locked onto Sarah. Martinez front and center. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her as she stepped forward. The whispers started again, barely audible but clearly present. She could practically feel the skepticism radiating from the other candidates. Rodriguez was built like a professional athlete, tall, lean, and clearly experienced in combat sports. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting his craft. As Sarah approached, she could see a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The key to any successful takedown, Thompson began, is understanding your opponent's center of gravity and using their own momentum against them. Rodriguez here is going to demonstrate a basic hip toss. Sarah positioned herself across from Rodriguez on the mat. She could hear murmurs from the watching candidates, most of them probably expecting to see her get thrown around like a rag doll. Rodriguez assumed a fighting stance, and Sarah mirrored his position. "Begin when ready," Thompson called out. Rodriguez moved forward confidently, reaching for Sarah's uniform to set up the hip toss. It was a textbook approach, exactly what any instructor would demonstrate for a class. But Sarah had spent years studying martial arts before joining the military, and she'd learned to read an opponent's intentions in the split second before they acted. As Rodriguez committed to his attack, Sarah saw the opening she needed. Instead of resisting his forward momentum, she used it to her advantage. She stepped slightly to the side, grabbed his extended arm, and used a perfectly executed judo throw to send him sailing through the air. The sound of Rodriguez hitting the mat echoed through the suddenly silent room. For a moment, nobody moved. The instructor lay on his back, more surprised than hurt, staring up at the ceiling with wide eyes. Sarah extended her hand to help him up, maintaining the respectful demeanor that had been drilled into her throughout her military career. Rodriguez took her hand and got to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. The silence in the room was deafening. Thompson's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see something shift in his eyes. The other candidates were staring at her with a mixture of shock, respect, and uncertainty. "Well," Thompson said finally, his voice cutting through the tension. That was unexpected. The atmosphere in the training facility changed instantly after Sarah's demonstration. Rodriguez dusted himself off, his face still red from embarrassment, while the other candidates exchanged glances that ranged from impressed to suspicious. Chief Thompson maintained his stoic expression, but Sarah could sense the gears turning in his mind. "All right, Martinez," Thompson said, crossing his arms over his chest. "That was a decent counter, but luck only gets you so far in this business." Sarah nodded respectfully. "Understood, Chief." Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Since you seem to have some experience with hand-to-hand combat, maybe you'd like to help me demonstrate the next technique. Rodriguez, take a seat." The young instructor gratefully moved to the sidelines, clearly relieved to be out of the spotlight. Sarah remained in the center of the mat, knowing that this was far from over. Thompson was testing her, and she suspected the real challenge was just beginning. "The technique I want to show you all," Thompson began, addressing the class while keeping his eyes fixed on Sarah, "is what we call the bear hug escape. It's designed for situations where a larger, stronger opponent has you trapped." Sarah's heart rate picked up slightly. She'd studied Thompson's file before arriving at the facility. The man was a legend among Special Operations Forces. He'd served with SEAL Team 6 for over a decade, had more combat deployments than most people had years of service, and was known for his expertise in close-quarters combat. Thompson moved to position himself behind Sarah. The scenario is simple. Your opponent grabs you from behind, pins your arms, and has a significant size and strength advantage. Most people panic and try to muscle their way out. As he spoke, Thompson's powerful arms encircled Sarah from behind, trapping her arms against her sides. His grip was firm but not painful. Yet, she could feel the collective attention of every person in the room focused on them. "The key," Thompson continued, his voice now speaking directly into Sarah's ear, "is to stay calm and find the weakness in your opponent's position." Sarah could feel the immense strength in Thompson's arms. He wasn't using his full power, but even at half strength, his grip was like being held by a mechanical vice. Several of the candidates were already shaking, their heads, probably thinking there was no way someone her size could escape from someone like Thompson. Now, most people in this situation would try to pry the arms apart or struggle against the grip, Thompson explained to the class. But that just wastes energy and gives your opponent time to adjust his hold or transition to something worse. Sarah remained perfectly still, her mind racing through the options she'd learned over years of martial arts training. The key to escaping a bear hug wasn't strength, it was understanding anatomy and leverage. "So Martinez," Thompson said, tightening his grip slightly, "what would you do in this situation?" Instead of answering verbally, Sarah demonstrated. She shifted her weight slightly to one side, then drove her heel down hard onto Thompson's instep, while simultaneously throwing her head back toward his face. As his grip loosened instinctively from the pain, she grabbed his right wrist with both hands and ducked low, spinning out of his grasp. But Thompson was ready for basic escape techniques. As soon as she broke free, he reached for her again, this time going for a different hold. Sarah saw his hands coming and reacted with the muscle memory that had been drilled into her through countless training sessions. She stepped into his attack rather than away from it, grabbed his extended arm, and used his forward momentum to execute a perfect arm drag. Thompson found himself off balance and stumbling forward while Sarah maintained control of his arm. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several candidates exchanged shocked glances, while others leaned forward to get a better view of what was happening. But Thompson wasn't finished. With the experience of someone who had been in real life or death situations, he quickly recovered and launched into a series of attacks designed to test Sarah's defensive capabilities. Each move was controlled and professional, but Sarah could tell he was steadily increasing the intensity. Sarah responded to each attack with textbook defensive techniques. When Thompson threw a slow, telegraphed punch, she slipped to the outside and countered with a palm strike to his ribs. When he attempted a takedown, she sprawled and used an overhook to control his posture. The demonstration had evolved into something much more than a simple teaching exercise. It had become a test of skill, technique, and mental toughness. Sarah could hear her own breathing, could feel the sweat beginning to form on her forehead, but she remained focused and calm. Thompson stepped back and held up his hands, signaling an end to the exchange. Both of them were breathing harder now, and Sarah could see a new expression in the chief's eyes, one that looked almost like respect. "Outstanding technique, Martinez," Thompson said, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "You've clearly had some quality training." Sarah straightened her uniform and nodded. "Thank you, Chief." Thompson turned to address the rest of the candidates. "What you just saw is the difference between someone who's had real training and someone who just thinks they're tough because they can bench press 300 pounds. Several of the larger candidates shifted uncomfortably at this comment. "Martinez demonstrated something critical that I want you all to remember," Thompson continued. "Combat isn't about who's bigger or stronger. It's about who's better trained, who stays calmer under pressure, and who can think tactically even when things get physical." Sarah could see the attitudes of some of her fellow candidates beginning to shift. The whispers and skeptical glances were being replaced by something that looked more like professional interest. Thompson walked over to the weapons rack and picked up a training knife, a rubber blade designed to simulate a real combat knife, without causing serious injury. "Now," he said, turning back to the class, "let's see how Martinez handles a blade threat." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Knife defense was one of the most dangerous aspects of close-quarters combat training. Even with rubber weapons, the margin for error was slim, and the techniques required split-second timing and perfect execution. Thompson held the training knife in a standard combat grip, the blade extending from his fist like a deadly extension of his arm. In real combat, you might face an opponent armed with an edged weapon. The key is to control the weapon hand while creating distance or neutralizing the threat. He moved toward Sarah slowly, the training knife held in a threatening position. The mistake most people make is focusing on the weapon instead of the person holding it. As Thompson closed the distance, Sarah's mind shifted into a state of heightened awareness that she'd developed through years of high-stress training. Time seemed to slow down as she watched his approach, noting every detail of his stance, his grip on the weapon, and the subtle telegraphs that preceded his attack. When Thompson lunged forward with the training knife, Sarah was ready. She sidestepped the attack while simultaneously grabbing his wrist with both hands, using his forward momentum to pull him off balance. In one fluid motion, she struck the nerve cluster on his forearm, causing his grip on the knife to loosen, then twisted his arm to force him to drop the weapon entirely. The rubber knife clattered to the floor as Sarah maintained control of Thompson's arm, keeping him in a position where he couldn't immediately counterattack. The silence in the room was absolute. Every single person was staring at the scene in front of them. A woman who couldn't weigh more than 140 pounds had just disarmed one of the most respected combat instructors in the Navy SEALs. Chief Thompson looked down at the rubber knife on the floor, then back at Sarah, who still maintained control of his arm. For a moment, the only sound in the training facility was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then Thompson did something that surprised everyone in the room. He smiled. "Release," he said calmly. Sarah immediately let go of his arm and stepped back, returning to a neutral stance. Thompson rubbed his forearm where she had struck the pressure point, nodding with what appeared to be genuine approval. "That, gentlemen," Thompson announced to the class, "is how it's done." He bent down to retrieve the training knife, then faced the assembled candidates. Martinez just demonstrated 3 critical principles of knife defense. First, she moved offline from the attack rather than backing straight up. Second, she controlled the weapon hand immediately. And third, she used precise technique instead of trying to overpower her opponent. Sarah could see the shift happening in real time. The skeptical expressions on many faces were being replaced by something closer to professional respect. A few candidates were even nodding in appreciation of what they had just witnessed. But not everyone was impressed. Sarah noticed a group of 3 men standing together near the back of the class, their expressions still ranging from doubtful to openly hostile. The largest of the 3, a massive man with close-cropped hair and arms like tree trunks, was shaking, his head and whispering something to his companions. Thompson continued the lesson, covering various defensive techniques and scenarios, but Sarah could feel the undercurrent of tension in the room. Some of the candidates had clearly accepted her presence and abilities, while others remained unconvinced. She'd dealt with this kind of divided reaction before, and she knew it would only get more challenging as the training progressed. After the formal instruction ended, Thompson dismissed the class for a lunch break. As the candidates began filing out of the facility, Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to follow them. She was looking forward to a chance to decompress and process what had just happened. "Martinez," Thompson called out. "Hold up a minute." Sarah stopped and turned around. The chief was walking toward her, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "That was some impressive work back there," he said when he reached her. "Where did you learn to move like that?" "I started martial arts when I was 12, Chief," Sarah replied. "My father thought it would be good for self-discipline. I continued, training throughout my time in the Army, and I've worked with some excellent instructors over the years." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "It shows. You've got good instincts and solid technique. But I need you to understand something about this place." Sarah waited for him to continue. "The men in this program are some of the best operators in the world," Thompson said. "They've earned their place here through blood, sweat, and combat experience. Some of them might see your performance today as showboating or trying to prove a point." "That wasn't my intention, Chief," Sarah said honestly. "You asked me to demonstrate, and I did what you asked." "I know," Thompson replied. "And you handled yourself professionally. But you need to be prepared for pushback. Not everyone is going to be happy about what happened in there." As if summoned by their conversation, the 3 men Sarah had noticed earlier approached them. The largest one, whose name tape read Kowalski, stepped forward with his companions flanking him. "Chief," Kowalski said, his voice carrying a slight edge, "we were wondering if we could get some clarification about the training standards here." Thompson's expression didn't change. "What kind of clarification, Kowalski?" "Well, sir," Kowalski continued, glancing at Sarah, "some of us are curious about whether everyone in this program is held to the same standards. Physical requirements, performance expectations, that kind of thing." Sarah could see where this was heading. She'd encountered this type of challenge numerous times throughout her career. The suggestion that standards were being lowered or bent to accommodate her presence. Thompson's response was immediate and firm. "Every person in this program is held to exactly the same standard, Kowalski. If you have concerns about your own ability to meet those standards, we can discuss that privately." Kowalski's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his respectful tone. "No concerns about my own abilities, Chief. Just want to make sure we're all playing by the same rules." We are, Thompson replied coldly. Unless you have something specific to discuss, I suggest you get to chow. Afternoon training starts in, 30 minutes. Kowalski and his companions exchanged glances before heading toward the exit. But Sarah could tell this wasn't over. The dynamic that was developing would likely play out over the coming days and weeks. After they left, Thompson turned back to Sarah. Like I said, be prepared for pushback, but don't let it get in your head. You've got skills and you belong here as much as anyone else. Sarah nodded. Understood, Chief. I'm here to train and learn, not to prove points or start fights. Good, Thompson replied. But if someone else starts a fight, I expect you to finish it. Now get some chow and be back here in 25 minutes. The dining facility was a large, sterile room filled with long tables and the constant chatter of conversation. Sarah got her food and looked around for a place to sit. Several tables had open seats, but she could sense the social dynamics at play. Some groups looked welcoming, others neutral, and a few were clearly closed off to her presence. She chose a table with 3 other candidates who had seemed professionally respectful during the morning session. As she sat down, one of them, a lean man with intelligent eyes whose name tape read Chen, nodded in greeting. That was some serious technique this morning, Chen said between bites of his sandwich. Where did you serve before this? Army Rangers, Sarah replied. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, various training assignments after that. Another man at the table, Patel, looked up with interest. Rangers? That's serious business. What made you want to cross-train with the teams? Sarah had been asked this question dozens of times during the application process, but she still considered her answer carefully. I want to be the best operator I can be. The SEALs have techniques and methods that aren't taught anywhere else. This seemed like an opportunity to expand my skill set. The third man at the table, Williams, had been quietly listening to the conversation. Now he leaned forward slightly. You know there's going to be guys here who don't want you to succeed, right? Sarah nodded. I figured as much. It's not the first time I've dealt with that situation. This might be different, Williams said seriously. Some of these guys have been in combat together. They've got a brotherhood thing that goes pretty deep. They might see your presence as threatening that bond. Chen shook his head. That's old school thinking. The military is changing, whether they like it or not. Maybe, Williams replied. But change doesn't always come easy. Sarah appreciated their candid assessment of the situation. It confirmed what she had already suspected. The real challenge here wasn't going to be the physical training or the tactical instruction. It was going to be navigating the complex social and psychological dynamics of being an outsider, trying to prove herself in an insular community. As they finished their meal, Sarah noticed Kowalski and his group at a table across the room. They were speaking in low voices and occasionally glancing in her direction. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language suggested they were planning something. Looks like the afternoon might be interesting, Patel observed, following her gaze. Sarah finished the last bite of her meal and stood up. Every afternoon should be interesting. That's why we're here. As she walked toward the exit, she could feel multiple sets of eyes tracking her movement. The morning had established her credibility as a skilled operator, but it had also painted a target on her back. The next few hours would determine whether that target would make her stronger or become a liability. The afternoon training session began in the team tactics classroom, where Thompson had arranged the candidates into small groups for scenario-based exercises. Sarah found herself assigned to a 4-person team with Chen, Patel, and unfortunately, Kowalski. The tension was immediate and palpable. All right, people, Thompson announced to the room. You're going to run through a series of close-quarters battle scenarios. Each team will rotate through different situations. Hostage rescue, room clearing, building searches. You'll be evaluated on tactical decision-making, communication, and execution. Sarah could see Kowalski's jaw clench as Thompson explained the exercise. Being forced to work with her was clearly not what he had in mind for the afternoon. Your first scenario, Thompson continued, handing each team a folder, is a hostage situation. You have intelligence that suggests 3 armed suspects are holding 2 civilian hostages in a mock building behind the facility. Plan your approach. Execute the mission and be prepared to justify your decisions. The team spread out to plan their operations. Sarah's team found a quiet corner where they could spread out the floor plans and discuss their options. Okay, Chen said, taking charge. We've got 3 possible entry points, front door, back door, and a window on the east side. Patel studied the blueprints. Intelligence says 3 suspects, but we should assume there might be more. They're probably expecting us to come through the front. Sarah examined the layout carefully. If I were them, I'd position 1 person watching the front approach, 1 covering the hostages, and 1 mobile. The window entry gives us the best angle to avoid the front security. Kowalski had been silent during the discussion, but now he spoke up. That's a lot of assumptions. We don't know their positions for sure. You're right, Sarah agreed. But we have to make tactical decisions, based on the most likely scenarios. What would you recommend? Kowalski stared at her for a moment as if surprised she had asked for his input. Multi-point entry, 2 teams, synchronized breach. 1 through the window, 1 through the back door. Chen nodded. That could work. Martinez and I take the window. You and Patel take the back door. We coordinate timing and move simultaneously. Why does she get point position? Kowalski asked, his tone sharp. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see Chen and Patel exchanging uncomfortable glances. Because, Chen said carefully, she demonstrated this morning that she's got solid CQB skills. So, do I, Kowalski replied. So does everyone here. That doesn't automatically make her team leader. Sarah realized that this was about more than tactical positioning. Kowalski was testing whether she would back down when confronted, whether she would defer to him because of his size and obvious experience. You're absolutely right, Sarah said calmly. We all have skills. What matters is putting together the best plan for the mission. If you think you should take point, make your case. Kowalski seemed taken aback by her response. He had clearly expected either confrontation or submission, not a professional discussion of tactics. I've done more actual breaches than anyone else here, he said after a moment. Real combat, real hostages, real consequences. Sarah nodded respectfully. That's valuable experience. How many hostage rescues have you been involved in? 6, Kowalski replied, his chest puffing out slightly with pride. That's impressive, Sarah said genuinely. I've only done 4. What did you learn from those operations that might help us here? Again, Kowalski seemed surprised by her response. He had been prepared for an argument, not a tactical discussion. Speed and violence of action, he said after a pause. Hostage takers panic when they're overwhelmed quickly. You give them time to think and people die. Agreed, Sarah replied. So how do we maximize our speed while maintaining coordination between entry teams? Chen watched this exchange with growing interest. Sarah was simultaneously acknowledging Kowalski's experience while maintaining her own position in the tactical discussion. Patel jumped in. We need clear communication signals and predetermined timing, no radio chatter during the approach. For the next 10 minutes, the team worked through the details of their plan. Despite the initial tension, they began functioning as a unit, with each person contributing based on their strengths and experience. When it came time to execute the exercise, their preparation showed. Sarah and Chen approached the window position, with disciplined movement while Kowalski and Patel flanked the back door. The synchronized breach was nearly perfect, and they cleared the building efficiently, securing both hostages and neutralizing the role-playing suspects. Thompson observed the exercise from a control position, taking notes on each team's performance. When Sarah's team finished, he nodded approvingly. Good execution, he said. Clean entry, good communication, mission accomplished with no hostage casualties. As they walked back to join the other teams, Kowalski fell into step beside Sarah. You handled that well, he said quietly, so the others couldn't hear. Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the admission. The tactical discussion, I mean, Kowalski continued. A lot of people would have gotten defensive or tried to pull rank. There wasn't any rank to pull, Sarah replied. We're all here to learn. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. I've got to ask, are you really here just to train, Or is this some kind of political statement? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him directly. I'm here because I want to be the best soldier I can be. That's it. No politics, no statements, no agenda, except getting better at my job. Kowalski studied her face, as if trying to determine whether she was being honest. Because, he continued, if you're here to make a point about women in special operations, some of us aren't going to make it easy for you. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I wouldn't want you to make it easy. Easy doesn't make anyone better. Something shifted in Kowalski's expression. Not friendship exactly, but perhaps the beginning of respect. The rest of the afternoon proceeded with additional exercises, building searches, ambush scenarios, and equipment familiarization. Sarah performed competently in each exercise, neither standing out dramatically nor falling behind. She was beginning to understand the delicate balance she needed to maintain. As the day wound down, Thompson gathered all the candidates for a debrief session. Today was about establishing baselines, he announced. I've seen what you can do individually and in small teams. Tomorrow we start the real work. Several candidates exchanged glances at this ominous statement. You'll notice that some exercises showed strong individual performance but weak team cohesion, Thompson continued. Others demonstrated good teamwork but lacked tactical sophistication. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to fix both problems. He paused, scanning the assembled group. I'm also going to be honest with you about something. This program isn't just about learning new techniques. It's about learning to work with people who might be different from you, who might have different backgrounds or experiences, but who share your commitment to mission accomplishment. Sarah could feel several sets of eyes glancing in her direction, though Thompson hadn't looked at her specifically. If you can't learn to work with everyone in this room, Thompson concluded, then you don't belong in special operations, period. As the candidates began to disperse, Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to head back to the barracks. The day had been a success in many ways. She had proven her tactical competence and had begun to earn the respect of at least some of her fellow candidates. But she also knew that Thompson's final comments had been directed at least partially toward the ongoing tension surrounding her presence. The real test wasn't her ability to perform individual tasks or even work in small teams. It was whether she could become an integrated part of a larger unit that might face life or death situations together. As she walked across the compound in the fading light, Sarah reflected on the complexity of her situation. She had the skills and experience to succeed in this program, but success would require more than just technical competence. It would require navigating personalities, politics, and preconceptions while maintaining her focus on the ultimate goal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she suspected that Thompson's comment about real work meant the training was about to become significantly more difficult. But for the first time since arriving at the facility, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about her chances of succeeding. The alarm clock in the barracks showed 4:30 hours when Sarah's eyes opened. She had trained herself to wake up before the official réveillé, using the quiet morning time to center herself and prepare mentally for whatever challenges the day might bring. Around her, the other candidates were still sleeping in their narrow bunks, the room filled with the sounds of steady breathing and occasional snoring. Sarah slipped out of bed quietly and made her way to the common area, where she began her personal morning routine of stretching and meditation. The habits had kept her grounded throughout her military career, especially during the most stressful periods of deployment and training. She was halfway through her routine when she heard footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, Chief Thompson appeared in the doorway, fully dressed and carrying a steaming cup of coffee. He looked surprised to see her up so early. Martinez, he said quietly, so as not to wake the others. You're up early. Yes, Chief, she replied, finishing her current stretch. Personal habit. Thompson nodded approvingly. Good. I like soldiers who don't need to be dragged out of bed. He took a sip of his coffee and studied her for a moment. How are you finding the program so far? Sarah considered her response carefully. Challenging but fair, Chief. The training is exactly what I expected. And the social dynamics? Sarah paused in her stretching routine. Thompson's question was clearly referring to the ongoing tension with some of the other candidates. Also, what I expected, she said honestly. Nothing I haven't dealt with before. Thompson walked farther into the room and sat down on one of the chairs facing her. Let me tell you something about this place, Martinez. The technical skills we teach here are important, but they're not the most important thing. Sarah listened attentively while continuing her stretches. The most important thing, Thompson continued, is trust. These men need to know that they can depend on you when everything goes wrong. When the bullets are flying, when the plan falls apart, when someone's life is hanging in the balance. Sarah nodded. I understand, Chief. Do you? Thompson asked. Because earning that trust isn't just about proving you can handle yourself in a controlled training environment. It's about proving you can be counted on when the stakes are real. Before Sarah could respond, they heard movement from the barracks area as other candidates began to stir. Thompson stood up and finished his coffee. Today's exercise is going to push everyone to their limits, he said. Physical, mental, and emotional. Some people are going to break. Others are going to discover what they're really made of. The official wake-up call came 30 minutes later, followed by the usual scramble of candidates getting dressed and preparing for morning formation. Sarah had already completed her personal preparation and was ready when the chaos began. Outside, the California morning was crisp and clear, with a slight breeze coming off the Pacific. The candidates formed up in neat rows on the gravel courtyard, their breath visible in the cool air. Thompson emerged from the operations building accompanied by two other instructors Sarah hadn't seen before. Gentlemen, Thompson announced, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. Today we're conducting what we call a stress inoculation exercise. You'll be working in teams of 8, facing a series of challenges designed to test your ability to function under extreme pressure. Sarah noticed that he had said gentlemen, despite her obvious presence, but she didn't react. She'd learned long ago that pointing out such things usually caused more problems than it solved. The exercise will run for 12 hours, Thompson continued. You'll face physical challenges, tactical problems, psychological pressure, and sleep deprivation. Some of you will discover that you're not as tough as you thought you were. One of the new instructors stepped forward. He was a compact man with scars on his arms and the weathered face of someone who had spent years in harsh environments. I'm Master Chief Petty Officer Harrison, he announced. I'll be running today's exercise along with Petty Officer Santos. Here. He gestured to the third instructor, a woman whose muscular build and confident bearing immediately commanded respect. Sarah felt a small surge of encouragement seeing another woman in an instructor role, though she was careful not to let it show on her face. The first challenge begins in 30 minutes, Harrison continued. Teams have already been assigned. When I call your name, form up with your team. As Harrison read off the team assignments, Sarah listened for her name. When it came, she was surprised by the composition of her team. Along with herself, it included Kowalski, Chen, and 5 other candidates she had worked with minimally during the previous days. Kowalski caught her eye as they formed up and gave her a slight nod. Their relationship had evolved from open hostility to grudging professional respect. But Sarah knew that real trust would require more than just successful completion of training exercises. Team 3, Harrison called out, addressing Sarah's group. Your first challenge is a 10-mile forced march carrying full combat loads. You'll be moving as a unit, and the time standard is aggressive. If one person falls behind, the entire team fails. Sarah calculated the math quickly in her head. 10 miles in full gear would normally take about 2.5 hours for a well-conditioned soldier. An aggressive time standard probably meant they were expected to complete it in under 2 hours. Additionally, Santos added, stepping forward, each team member will be carrying a 20-pound ammunition can that cannot be set down or passed to another team member. These represent mission-critical supplies that must reach the objective, the IDI. Ammunition cans were distributed, and Sarah hefted hers experimentally. 20 pounds might not sound like much, but carrying it for 10 miles while maintaining a fast pace would be a significant challenge. One more thing, Harrison said with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The route includes 3 tactical problems that must be solved en route. Failure to complete any tactical problem results in automatic team failure. As the teams prepared to move out, Sarah's group huddled briefly to discuss strategy. The forced march would test their physical conditioning, but the tactical problems would require them to think clearly even when exhausted. Okay, Chen said, taking charge. We need to pace ourselves for the long haul. Start strong, maintain steady pressure, but don't burn out in the first 3 miles. Kowalski nodded agreement. And we stay together as a unit. Nobody gets left behind, no matter what. Sarah appreciated his emphasis on team cohesion, especially since she was likely to be the physically weakest member of the group in terms of pure strength and size. The march began at a punishing pace. Within the first mile, Sarah could feel her legs beginning to burn and her heart rate climbing toward its maximum sustainable level. The ammunition can seem to grow heavier with each step, and the weight of her full combat load pressed down on her shoulders and hips. But she had been through similar challenges before. During Ranger School, she had completed forced marches that were just as demanding, and she had learned to find a rhythm that she could maintain even when her body wanted to quit. The first tactical problem appeared at the 3-mile mark. The team encountered a mock roadblock with armed role-players, and they had to devise a plan to neutralize the threat while protecting their ammunition supplies. Working together despite their exhaustion, they developed a flanking maneuver that allowed them to eliminate the threat without losing any team members or dropping their ammunition cans. The solution required coordination and clear thinking, both of which became more difficult as fatigue set in. By mile 6, 2 members of the team were struggling significantly. Johnson, a large man who had looked physically imposing at the start, was breathing heavily and had developed a noticeable limp. Rodriguez, normally one of the fastest runners in the class, was sweating profusely and had fallen to the back of the group. We need to adjust pace, Sarah said quietly to Chen and Kowalski. We're going to lose Johnson and Rodriguez if we don't slow down. Kowalski glanced back at the struggling team members. We slow down, we might miss the time standard. We leave. People behind, we definitely fail, Sarah replied. Chen made the decision. We stay together. Redistribute some weight if we need to. Can't redistribute the ammo cans, Johnson gasped, overhearing the conversation. Sarah had an idea. We can't pass the cans, but we can provide other support. She moved to Johnson's position and, without taking his ammunition can, began sharing some of the weight of his combat pack by supporting it with her free hand. It was awkward and made her own load more difficult to manage, but it allowed Johnson to continue moving at the required pace. Kowalski observed this for several minutes, then moved to assist Rodriguez in a similar manner. Soon, the stronger team members were helping support the struggling ones without violating the rules of the exercise. The second tactical problem appeared at mile 8. This time, they had to cross a simulated minefield while under sniper fire, all while maintaining possession of their ammunition cans. The solution required careful coordination and trust, as team members had to cover each other while navigating the hazardous terrain. Sarah found herself in a leadership role during this challenge, directing the team's movement and coordinating their response to the simulated sniper threat. Her smaller size allowed. Phase 2 of the stress inoculation exercise took place in a specially constructed facility that simulated an urban combat environment. The building was a maze of rooms, corridors, and stairwells designed to replicate the confusion and danger of fighting in populated areas. Sarah's team had been given 15 minutes to rest, hydrate, and receive their mission briefing. Despite the successful completion of the forced march, she could see that everyone was already operating on the edge of their physical and mental reserves. Intelligence indicates that high-value targets are located somewhere in this building, Santos explained, gesturing toward the imposing structure. Your mission is to locate and secure these targets while dealing with hostile forces, civilian casualties, and time pressure. Harrison stepped forward with additional details. You'll be facing live role players using simulation ammunition. The gear you're wearing has sensors that will register hits. If you're killed, you're out of the exercise permanently. If, too, many team members are eliminated, the mission fails. Sarah checked her simulation equipment one final time. The laser tag style system would provide immediate feedback on the effectiveness of their tactics, but it also meant that mistakes would have real consequences for the team's success. One final element, Santos continued. Somewhere in this building there are civilian role players who must be protected. If any civilian is harmed or killed during your operation, the entire team fails immediately. The complexity of the scenario was becoming clear. They would need to move quickly enough to complete the mission within the time limit, carefully enough to avoid civilian casualties, and tactically sound enough to defeat the hostile forces they would encounter. Kowalski gathered the team for a quick planning session. We go in as 2 fire teams, he said. Martinez, Chen, Johnson, and Williams take the left side. Rodriguez, Peterson, Murphy, and I take the right. We clear systematically and maintain communication. Sarah nodded her agreement, but she had concerns about the plan. What about civilian identification? In this kind of environment, split-second decisions about who's a threat and who's innocent could make or break the mission. Good point, Chen added. We need clear protocols for civilian contact. They spent several precious minutes developing hand signals and communication procedures that would allow them to share information about civilian locations and threat assessments in real time. When the exercise began, Sarah's fire team entered through the building's main entrance while Kowalski's team flanked around to a secondary entry point. The interior was dimly lit and filled with the sounds of movement, voices, and simulated urban noise designed to create stress and confusion. The first floor cleared quickly, with no contact from hostile forces, but several civilian role players who had to be identified, secured, and protected. Sarah found herself naturally taking point for her fire team, her smaller size and demonstrated close-quarters combat skills, making her effective in the tight confines of the building. Contact, second floor, came Kowalski's voice over the radio. The sound of simulated gunfire echoed through the building, followed by shouted commands and movement. Sarah's team quickened their pace, knowing that their teammates were engaged and might need support. As they reached the stairwell leading to the second floor, Sarah held up her hand to halt the team's movement. She had heard something that didn't fit the pattern of sounds they had been experiencing, a faint crying sound that seemed to be coming from a room they hadn't yet cleared. Possible civilian in distress, she whispered into her radio. Investigating. Sarah approached the door carefully, using proper tactical procedures to avoid presenting a silhouette or exposing herself to potential hostile fire. When she opened the door, she found a role player simulating an injured civilian, a young woman who appeared to be trapped under debris. I need help, the role player said, staying in character. My leg is trapped and I think it's broken. Sarah immediately called for Williams to assist while she provided security. Together, they carefully moved the simulated debris and helped the injured civilian to safety. The role player was convincing in her performance, adding to the stress and realism of the scenario. But the time spent on the civilian rescue had allowed hostile forces to reposition. As Sarah's team continued their advance toward the second floor, they walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush. Simulated gunfire erupted from multiple positions, and Sarah's sensors immediately indicated that Johnson had been killed. The remaining 3 members of her fire team took cover and began returning fire while trying to assess the tactical situation. We've got multiple shooters, Sarah reported over the radio. Johnson is down, we need support. Kowalski's voice came back immediately. On our way, hold your position. But Sarah realized that holding their position was exactly what the hostile forces wanted them to do. The ambush was designed to pin them down while additional enemies moved to surround them. Negative, she transmitted. We're going to push through. Be ready to support. Without waiting for authorization, Sarah made a tactical decision that would have significant consequences for the entire team. Instead of remaining in a defensive position, she led her remaining team members in an aggressive assault on the hostile positions. The move was risky and unconventional, but it caught the role-playing enemies off guard. Sarah's team was able to eliminate 2 hostile positions and create an opening for Kowalski's fire team to advance and provide support. Within minutes, the second floor was cleared, but the cost had been high. In addition to Johnson's early elimination, Rodriguez had been killed during the fighting, reducing the team's effective strength. Third floor is the target location, Kowalski reported. 6 of us left, unknown number of hostiles above us. The third floor presented the most challenging tactical problem yet. Intelligence had indicated that the high-value targets were located there, but the hostile forces had clearly prepared defensive positions designed to prevent exactly the kind of assault Sarah's team was attempting. Sarah studied the building layout and realized that conventional tactics were unlikely to succeed. The enemy would be expecting them to advance up the main stairwell, and they had probably prepared accordingly. "There's got to be another way up," she said to Chen. "Emergency exit, service stairs, something they're not covering." Chen consulted the building schematic they had been provided. "Fire escape on the east side, but it's outside the building." Sarah looked at the remaining team members, herself, Chen, Williams, Kowalski, Peterson, and Murphy. 6 people to complete a mission, designed for 8. "New plan," she announced. 3 of us go up the fire escape and come through the windows. 3 others provide distraction through the main stairwell. Kowalski looked skeptical. "That splits our force even more." "It also splits their attention," Sarah replied. "Right now, they're concentrated on one approach. If we hit them from 2 directions simultaneously, we might be able to overwhelm their defenses." The plan required precise timing and coordination. Sarah, Chen, and Williams would scale the fire escape and enter through the third-floor windows, while Kowalski, Peterson, and Murphy would launch a frontal assault up the main stairs. As Sarah climbed the fire escape, she could hear the sounds of the frontal assault beginning below. Simulated gunfire filled the building as Kowalski's team engaged the hostile forces from the expected direction. Sarah reached the third-floor window and carefully looked inside. As she had hoped, most of the defenders were focused on the stairwell entrance. She could see 2 high-value target role players in the far corner of the room, guarded by what appeared to be the last remaining hostile forces. "Window team in position," she whispered into her radio. "Frontal team engaged," came Kowalski's reply. "Execute when ready." Sarah took a deep breath and made the final tactical decision of the exercise. Instead of waiting for a perfect opportunity, she kicked in the window and led the assault from an unexpected direction. The next 60 seconds were a blur of movement, simulated gunfire, and tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. Sarah's team engaged the hostile forces from behind, while Kowalski's team pressed their assault from the front. When the shooting stopped, Sarah's sensors indicated that she had been wounded but not killed. Chen had been eliminated, but Williams was still effective. From the other direction, Kowalski and Murphy had survived, though Peterson had been lost in the final assault. Most importantly, both high-value targets had been secured without injury, and no civilians had been harmed during the entire operation. Harrison and Santos entered the room as the exercise concluded, their clipboards ready to record the final results. "Mission accomplished," Harrison announced. "High-value targets secured. Acceptable casualty rates, no civilian casualties." Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as the adrenaline began to subside. The 12-hour exercise had pushed every member of the team beyond their normal limits, but they had succeeded. "More importantly," Santos added, addressing the entire team, "you functioned as a unit under extreme pressure. You made tactical decisions collectively, supported each other when things got difficult, and accomplished the mission despite significant challenges." As the team gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the facility, Kowalski approached Sarah,